The repeal law and dramatic performances flagged by the Prime Minister. Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Saturday asked why a colonial law that allowed the arrest of people dancing in public places had continued to exist even 75 years after independence. He was speaking the government's effort to repeal archaic and obsolete laws in the recent years. The Prime Minister's reference was to the Dramatic Performances Act 1876, which gave the British government the power to prohibit public dramatic performances which are scandalous, defamatory, seditious, or obscene. This law was among those enacted by the British to clamp down on the nascent Indian nationalist sentiment following the visit of Prince of Wales Albert Edward to India from October 75 to May 1876. Other significant laws that were enacted during the 1870s included the Draconian Vernacular Press Act 1878 and the Sedition Law of 1870. Under the Act, any place, pantomime, or other drama performed or about to be performed in a public place could be banned from the government if the government was of the opinion that play was scandalous or defamatory in nature. Or was likely to excite feelings of disaffection to the government established by law or to deprave the corrupt persons present at the performance. A magistrate could warrant the search and seizure of any house, room, or place is used or is about to be used for any performance prohibited under the Act. As punishment, the law prescribed a jail term of up to 3 months or a fine or both. What was the status of the law after Indian independence? Parliament formally repealed the law with effect from January 2018 as part of the Narendra Modi government's exercise to weed out obsolete laws. However, the Dramatic Performance Act has been a valid law since at least 1956. On May 10, 1956, in a ruling titled State versus Babulal and others, the Allahabad High Court ruled that the law was inconsistent with the Constitution of India. The law was also introduced in states such as Madhya Pradesh, Karnataka, Delhi, and Tamil Nadu, and was later repealed. The Madras High Court struck down Tamil Nadu Dramatic Performances Act 1954 in 2013. In June 1953, the Lucknow branch of the Indian People's Theatre Association, the oldest body of state artists in India, had planned to stage out a play based on Munshi Premchand's short story Eidgah. The theatre group had applied for permission under the law. However, for reasons unknown, the magistrate in Lucknow cancelled the permission prohibiting the play. The prohibitory order was served to the accused in the middle of the performance, which they ignored and continued with the performance. Allahabad High Court, instead of looking at this specific case, examined the constitutionality of the law. It referred to the judgments where colonial statutes were inconsistent with fundamental rights guaranteed by the India's constitution, from laws on preventive detention to those of censorship, has been struck down or modified. In our opinion, the Dramatic Performances Act is ultra virus of the Constitution because of its procedural part imposes such restrictions on the rights of freedom of speech and expression which cannot be covered by saving clause of Article 19 Clause 2. The ruling noted the petitioner's contention that the case might have been victimization of persons who have a different political ideology than the ideology of party in power. Article 372 of the Constitution, continuance in force of existing laws and their adaptation, states that laws in force in the territory of India immediately before the commencement of this Constitution shall continue in force therein until altered or repealed or amended by a competent legislature or other competent authority. However, colonial laws do not enjoy the presumption of constitutionality, which means that when a colonial law is challenged, the government must defend the law for it to be valid. Other laws, those enacted by the Parliament of Independent India, are deemed constitutional until declared otherwise, which means that when challenged in court, the onus is on the petitioner to prove that legislation violates the Constitution. Other laws that enacted by the Parliament of Independent India are deemed constitutional unless declared otherwise, which means when challenged in court, the onus is on the petitioner to prove the legislation violates the Constitution. Article 372 of the Constitution, continuance in force of existing laws and their adaptation, states that laws in force in the territory of India immediately before the commencement of Constitution shall continue in force therein until altered or repealed or amended by a competent legislature or any other competent authority. Successive governments, including the Narendra Modi government, have defended several colonial laws. Congress led governments of the past have defended laws on preventive detention and unlawful associations. The Modi government has retained sedition law, section 124A of the Indian Penal Code 1860, a colonial statute, as act of endangering sovereignty, unity and integrity of India in the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita 2023, section 152 of the BNS. Sedition law colonial statute has been retained, endangering sovereignty, unity of integrity of India, section 152 of the BNS. In step 22, Supreme Court stayed all trials in respect of charges framed under 124A of IPC. In 2022, Supreme Court stayed all trials in respect of charges framed under section 124 of the IPC. The government has also defended the so-called marital rape exception, another colonial law. Government has also defended the so-called marital rape exception, another colonial law, which is currently under challenge before the Supreme Court. Exception 2 of the Section 375 IPC states that sexual intercourse by a man with his own wife, the wife not being under 15 years of age, is not rape. This provision has been retained in exception 2 in Section 63 of the BNS, with the wife's age raised to from 15 to 18. The repeal of obsolete laws has been a flagship project of the Modi government. Since 2014, it has repealed more than 2,000 such laws in several batches. Obsolete laws, by definition, are laws which are no longer in use. The Dramatic Performances Act 1876, though declared unconstitutional by the High Court almost 7 decades ago and no longer in use, was formally deleted by the Parliament through repealing and amending Second Act 2017. Making sense of the GDP data, the center has released latest estimates. The center has released latest estimates of India's GDP, making significant revisions for past quarters and years. Why does the government make these revisions? What do these changes as estimates say for about the economy? The Indian government on Friday released the latest estimates of the country's which is measured by the gross domestic product. The GDP is the market value of all goods and services produced within the geographical boundaries of India in a particular period. A quarter, 3 months of financial year April to March. The number discussed here are real GDP numbers, which are derived after taking away the effect of prices from nominal GDP, which is calculated at current day prices. The Indian economy's GDP growth in the second quarter, July, August, September of the current financial year FY25 has slumped to 5.4%. This has shocked most observers as it signaled a sharp deceleration in India's growth momentum. On Friday, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation released three sets of GDP estimates. GDP for third quarter October to December of the ongoing financial year. This data would tell whether the slump in quarter 2 was one-off or part of a trend. GDP forecast for the full year. These are called the second advance estimates and are essentially a forecast of India's GDP by the time the financial year ends on March 31. The second advance estimates were preceded by first advance estimates that were released in January. The key thing to watch out here was whether the underlying growth momentum since the slump in quarter 2 was considered good enough to lift the overall GDP growth rate in the country. The first advance estimates has pegged the GDP growth rate at 6.4%. In other words, India's GDP was expected to be 6.4% higher than the previous year. GDP estimates for the preceding two financial year. These are called the first revised estimates and the first final estimates of FY23. Why so many revisions? While the government releases GDP estimates for each quarter, it does so on the initial set of data it has collected and uses some assumptions and calculations to arrive at the GDP estimate. As time goes by, more and better quality data are available with the government, which updates or revises the GDP number for each quarter and as a consequence for each year. Typically, apart from quarterly GDP estimates, there are 5 rounds of GDP estimates for a particular year. These are FAE release in January and the relevant financial year. The second advance estimates in February of that year. Provisional estimates, this includes the data from quarter 4 or January to March in May, and the final revised estimates in February a year later, and the final estimates in February 2 years later. On the whole, GDP updates were positive, but the highlight was kind of revisions that took place in the past quarters and years. As far as quarterly GDP is concerned, India's GDP in quarter 3 grew by 6.2% over the same quarter last year, and Mosby also revised the quarter 2 GDP growth from 5.4% to 5.6%. For revision for the previous financial year, GDP was revised sharply from 8.2% to 9.2%. The final first advanced estimates for FY24, which were released in January, has pegged the GDP growth at 7.3%. As such, the growth rate has been revised up by 1.9 percentage points in a year's time. Similarly, the GDP growth rate for FY22-23 was revised from 7% to 7.6%. Do GDP estimates go through large revisions? The table alongside the GDP revisions for each of the past 6 financial years provide perspective to the rate of revisions that have been brought about this time. FY21, the year India went a technical recession due to COVID-induced nationwide lockdowns, saw substantial revisions in GDP estimates. This is understandable as data gathering and data quality also took a severe hit that year. But for other years, the revisions are more or less significant. For instance, FY22 started off with an estimate of 9.2% and after varying in a narrow band, ended up exactly where final advance first advance estimates pegged it. In this context, the sharp upward revision from the previous financial year stands out, a difference of 1 percentage point between the provisional estimates released in last May and the first revised estimates released on Friday is even more than the difference in COVID-19. What is the significance of sharp upward GDP revision? GDP data provides the benchmark of understanding the Indian economy. Weaker GDP data points to weaker tax collection for the governments and lower profits for corporate India. These in turn have implications of their own. For instance, one of the biggest reasons why Indian stock markets are getting punished by foreign investors currently is the slump in corporate earnings at a macro level. Before it was revised on Friday, the FY24 GDP data suggested that private consumption demand in India, that is, money spent by Indians in their individual capacity for everyday activities, to be it buying a car or a shampoo, had slumped. This private consumer demand is the biggest contributor or engine of India's GDP growth, and before Friday's revision, it was pegged at a growth rate of 4% in FY24. After revision, it was pegged it was pay after in fact even in the revised estimates of FY23, the private consumer demand has seen a significant uptake. On the face of it, these are substantial shifts in momentum and suggest that private consumption demand was not weakening as much as previously understood. In fact, in the current financial year, it is the private consumer demand which is pulling up the GDP growth rate far more than other engines of GDP growth, such as government spending or the spending by the private sector towards new capacities such as factories. In essence, the revisions append the existing underlying. In essence, the revisions append the existing understanding of the internal dynamics of the Indian economy, what is holding back growth and what is propelling it. There are three main takeaways. Until last March, India's economy was doing much better than the previously understood. The slump in India's growth momentum in the current financial year is sharper than the previously imagined. The deceleration in GDP growth rate is now 9.2% to 6.5%, and sharp revision of data undermine both reading of the Indian economy. Grandmaster Boris Spassky and Cold War era match of the century he played. Former world champion Boris Spassky passed away at the age of 88 on February 27. He is perhaps best remembered for having played the legendary match of the century against American Bobby Fischer in 1972. Tea leaves can pull heavy metals from water. Find new study. Tea leaves effectively pull heavy metals from water, lowering the amounts of dangerous lead and cadmium that people may be drinking. We are not suggesting that everyone starts using tea leaves as a water filter. Our work highlights the unrecognized potential for tea consumption to passively contribute to reduced heavy metal exposure in populations worldwide. The study found that heavy metals get adsorbed while tea is brewed. Put simply, heavy metal ions stick to the surface of tea leaves and remain trapped there. We may encounter many defeats, but we must not be defeated. Giving cities their dues. India's urban centers need to plan better to tackle pollution climate change. Every winter, Delhi's air turns hazardous at worst, unhealthy at best. Not just in the capital, pollution has become a national issue. Our cities are among the most polluted in the world. Indian cities struggle with climate change, poor infrastructure, and weak public services. By 2036, more than 600 million people will live in Indian cities. Our cities are not ready for this growth. Roads are overcrowded, pollution is worsening, and essential services like water and sanitation are failing. Our cities are becoming unsafe and unlivable. Indian cities have immense potential but struggle to match global destinations like Bangkok, London, Dubai, and Singapore. Bangkok thrives on its effective metro, vibrant street life, and tourist friendly policies. London offers seamless public transport, green spaces, and cultural hubs. Dubai attracts businesses with world class urban planning and infrastructure investment incentives. Singapore leads in clean governance and smart city initiatives. Last year, Mumbai and Bengaluru witnessed flooding and waterlogging, disrupting everyday life and displacing thousands. New Delhi and the rest of North India endured a heat wave with temperatures touching close to 50 degrees Celsius. These these led to several heat-related illnesses and fatalities. There are few examples where cities must integrate climate-resilient planning, putting in place green infrastructure like parks and green roofs can help, etc. And Indian cities face severe pollution crisis which is threatening public health and economic growth. In addition, air pollution, water and waste mismanagement impact millions daily. 42 towns rank among the top 50 for air pollution with nearly 50% of the 603 rivers polluted and less than one-fifth of the waste treated. Vehicle emissions, industrial discharge, and weak construction dust contribute to respiratory diseases and other health issues. The Clean Air Fund estimates that air pollution cost India almost $95 billion annually in lost productivity and healthcare expenses. Water pollution is also critical. Major rivers like Yamuna and Ganga are heavily contaminated, making them unsafe for consumption and harmful for marine biodiversity. In Bengaluru, lakes have either dried up or become toxic, while floods in Chennai while uh, while floods in Chennai have worsened groundwater contamination, leading to a cut-off of clean water supply for many communities. The lack of waste management or mismanagement adds to the pollution pressures. Overflowing landfills emits hazardous methane, informal waste collection, and lack of garbage disposal mechanisms allows pests and diseases to thrive. Our cities needs comprehensive strategies to combat air, water, and waste pollution. Last year, Mumbai and Bengaluru witnessed flooding and waterlogging, disrupting everyday life and displacing thousands. New Delhi and the rest of North India endured a heat wave. These led to several heat-related illnesses. These are few examples why India must integrate climate resilience planning, putting in place green infrastructure, putting in place green infrastructure like parks and green roofs can help alleviate heat levels while investing in modern drainage and flood management systems to mitigate the effects of rainfall. Strengthening early warning systems and community preparedness can save lives. Water pollution is also critical. Major rivers like Ganga and Yamuna are heavily contaminated, making them unsafe for consumption. In Bengaluru, lakes are either dried up or become toxic, and in Chennai, floods in Chennai have worsened groundwater contamination, leading to a cutoff of clean water supply for many communities. The lack of waste management or mismanagement adds to pollution pressures. Overflowing landfills emits hazardous methane. Informal waste collection and lack of garbage disposal mechanisms allows pests and diseases to thrive. Our cities need comprehensive strategies to combat air, water, and waste pollution. In India, a census town is a settlement that, while not officially designated as an urban area, exhibits all the characteristics of it. According to the 2011 census, census towns increased from 1300 in 2001 to 3800 in 2011, contribute to nearly one third of urban growth during a decade. While this proliferation indicates the rapid urbanization, it also presents significant challenges. Census towns continue to be governed as rural areas lacking the capacity and resources to manage urban infrastructure and services. This governance mismatch leads to inadequate urban planning, insufficient public services, and haphazard development. Moreover, the absence of urban status means that these towns do not receive appropriate funding. Moreover, the absence of urban status means that these towns do not receive appropriate funding from urban development schemes. Their delayed recognition and integration impedes their development and exacerbates regional disparities. A census town is a settlement that, while not officially designated as an urban area, exhibits all characteristics of it. According to 2011 census, census towns increased from 1300 to 3800. Transforming our cities will require an overhauling of planning, strengthened governance, and sustainable financing. With actions on this front, India can develop livable, resilient, and economically vibrant cities that can become global attractions. The first step must be to notify these census towns as urban areas in their own right. States must take the lead. In the 1960s, Singapore faced overcrowding, slums, traffic congestions, environmental pollution, floods, and water shortages. To address these issues, the government implemented a comprehensive urban development strategy focused on efficient land use, robust infrastructure, and sustainable growth. Singapore's urbanization journey offers valuable insights for India. In the Union Budget for 25-26, the Indian government announced the establishment of 1 lakh crore Urban Challenge Fund. In the Union Budget of 25-26, the Indian government announced the establishment of 1 lakh crore Urban Challenge Fund. This fund will implement initiatives in areas such as cities of growth hubs, creative redevelopment of cities, and water and sanitation. Indian cities must be challenged to transform into world class destinations by learning from Singapore's structured urbanization. The fund can incentivize cities to adopt long term planning, invest in mass transit, and enhance sustainability. Singapore's success lies in affordable housing, green urban spaces, and efficient governance. Lessons India must embrace a city level grand challenge to clean our cities can be one aspect of this fund. Cities should be judged on how well they tackle air and water pollution. Parameters could include electrification of transport, controlling emissions, waste management practices, and construction management practices to control air pollution. Our cities are grappling with overcrowding, pollution, and poor health, but these are not insurmountable challenges. The time for change is now, and the next decade will determine the fate of our cities. They can become smart, green, and livable, or succumb to pollution, congestion, and insecurity. This refers to editorial gender, just the third tier of our Article 243D of our Constitution mentions women's reservation of Panchayati Raj institutions. However, it has argued that women representatives usually work as proxies for their political ambitious husbands. Women representatives usually work as proxies for their politically ambitious husbands who either have been Pradhan in previous terms or harboring ambitions to contest elections when the seat is not reserved for a women candidate. PM Modi's call to 1 lakh youth to join politics may be a way out to bring self motivated women at all levels so they can gain a share in real in power in real terms. This refers to the editorial gender just the third tier. The Sarpanchpati culture has always remained the core problem when it comes to women wielding actual power in panchayat areas after introduction of reservation provisions by the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act. This culture has deprived of them their dignity, autonomy, and voice in personal and professional affairs, reducing them to become faceless wives or daughter-in-laws in public affairs, affecting the quality of governance at local level. Patriarchal norms, attitudes, and practices, and socio-economic barriers such as poverty, illiteracy, and lack of mobility, maintaining a balance between domestic responsibility and public roles for women without compromising their health and well-being are challenges that need to be addressed. This refers to the editorial "No Flash in the Pan." Cricket has become so popular that it is being played in the streets as well as in the beautiful stadiums of various countries. Even our parliamentarians exhibit their prowess in the game. Afghanistan has no program to promote its cricket, but dedicated players have been carrying out their practices. Due to hard work and discipline, the Afghan team has risen to beat the world's best team individually. Ibrahim Zardan, Rashid Khan perform to the required rhythm under the guidance of Ajay Jadeja and Jonathan Trott. Their skills are being sharpened to fulfill international standards in all forms of cricket to become a formidable unit. In search of greener pastures, migration can work if for all if governments across countries collaborate with successful immigrants. In America First and opening, Trump's threat of reciprocal tariffs could be a chance to transition from protectionism to a productivity driven agri export strategy. US President Donald Trump's latest push for reciprocal tariffs is aimed at reducing trade deficit and aligns with the broader America First policy. In 2024, the US trade deficit has surged to $914 billion from $784 billion in 2023. The large deficit was recorded with China $295 billion, while India accounted only for $45 billion. Trump has, however, frequently criticized India's high tariffs and trade barriers on American goods, referring to India as the tariff king. During Prime Minister Narendra Modi's recent US visit, Trump reiterated that India would not be exempt from these proposed tariffs, which are designed to match the import tariffs that other countries impose on US goods. We don't know yet whether these reciprocal tariffs will be on all goods or sector by sector or commodity by commodity, but it is better to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. According to WTO data, and India imposes significantly higher tariffs than the US with simple average rate of 17% on all goods compared to about 3.3% imposed by the US. The trade-weighted tariffs further highlight this gap: 12% in India versus 2.2% in the US. However, the most striking difference is in the agriculture sector, where India's tariffs are notably higher. The simple average tariff being 39% and trade-weighted average being 65%. In comparison, the US maintains relatively low agricultural tariffs with simple average of 5% and a trade-weighted rate of 4%. Given the stark tariff disparity in agri-products, the proposed reciprocal tariffs could have a substantial impact on India's agricultural exports to the US, its largest trading partner. The US is India's largest agri-export market, giving a trade surplus of $3.46 billion in 23-24. Key Indian exports include shrimp, basmati rice, processed foods, and honey, while US exports to India include almonds, cotton, ethanol, soybean oil. If Trump's tariffs threats materialize, Indian agri-exports, especially duty-free items like shrimp, could become uncompetitive. while imports from the US may rise. This could shrink or even erase India's agri surplus with the US, and thus cool-headed negotiations are important for India to maximize its gain by asking for market access to number of agri commodities where India has comparative advantage and lowering duties on others where US may like to export to India. US interests are exporting whiskey, which attracts 150% duty in India, walnuts and chicken legs attracting 100% duty, skimmed milk powder attracting 60% duty, wheat, soybean, maize, which attracts 40%, 45%, and 50% import duty in India, beside non-tariff barriers of GM crops in India. While India has adopted BT cotton and its byproducts such as GM cotton seed oil and cotton seed oil cake, which is also used as its feed, it's continued to ban GM soy and maize despite domestic demand for growing high protein animal feed and ethanol production. This restrictive trade policy has frustrated the US, which remains a global leader in GM crop production with high yields. India has adopted BT cotton and its byproducts such as GM cotton seed oil and cotton seed oil cake, which is used as a feed. It continues to ban GM soy and maize. The challenge for India is to strike a balance between protecting its farmers and keeping its most lucrative export market open. India and US are already holding discussions for a broader trade agreement with the Mission 500, which aims to boost bilateral trade to $500 billion by 2030. There is much scope for increasing India's agri-exports to the US provided India gets market access. Food preparations, butter, bovine meat cuts all attract more than 20% import duty in the US. These can be negotiated to lower levels provided India is also ready to lower its import duties. Our analysis shows that Indian agriculture is quietly competitive and its exports can increase provided export policy remains open. Many fruits and vegetables ranging from bananas to okra have export potential, but it will require streamlining their export value chains. India has been open to selective concessions. For instance, in Washington, apples a phased tariff reduction in food preparations, currently at 150%, walnuts 100%, cut chicken legs 100%, and dairy products such as cheese, skimmed milk powder 30 to 60% should be implemented, particularly as US is keen on pushing these into Indian markets. While tariffs on commodities like walnuts, cranberries, and blueberries can be reduced immediately, products where domestic producers remain competitive, such as poultry, cut chicken legs, should undergo gradual tariff reductions. Tariff concessions are like band-aid in the short term. In the medium to long term, we need to set our house in order. First, R&D investments is one major action. Currently, central and state agricultural investments together remain below 0.5% of agricultural GDP, far lower than global comparisons. India must invest at least 1% of its agri-GDP in R&D, ensuring that exports remain competitive rather than dependent on trade protection. Second, India must modernize its agri-value chains, including expanding cold storage capacity, upgrading logistics infrastructure, and ensuring better quality certification and traceability. Key production clusters must be developed to agri-export hubs with the help of APIDA to boost India's agri-export potential in high-value horticultural commodities, banana, mango, pulp, pomegranates in markets like Russia, Korea, Japan, and Australia. Tariff concessions are like band-aids in short term. In the medium to long term, we need to set our house in order. First, R&D investments is one major action. Currently, central and state agricultural investments together remain below 0.5% of agri-GDP, far lower than global comparisons. India must invest at least 1% of its agri-GDP in R&D, ensuring that exports remain competitive rather than dependent on trade protection. Second, India must modernize its agri-value chains, including expanding cold storage capacity, upgrading logistics infrastructure, ensuring better quality certification, traceability. Cold storage capacity, logistics infrastructure, ensuring better quality certification and traceability. Key production clusters must be developed to agri-export hubs with the help of APIDA to boost India's agri-export potential in high-value horticulture commodities. India's agricultural trade can grow in increasing reciprocal global markets if we negotiate smartly and prioritize our investments that make agriculture more competitive rather than leaning towards heavy subsidies as in the case of fertilizers and free power. Trump's tariff threat should be a wake-up call for India's agricultural policy makers. If handled wisely, it could be an opportunity to transition from a tariff-heavy Trump protectionism to a more resilient productivity-driven export strategy, one that ensures long-term gains for Indian farmers and exporters alike. In search of greener pastures, migration can work if all for all if governments across countries collaborate with successful immigrants. Meenakshi Ahmed's book India's Genius: The Meteoric Rise of Indians in the America is interestingly timely and important. The book is interesting because biographical sketches are history without theory. It is timely because immigration is a hot button subject in the West, and with the arrival of two plane loads of deported Indians from America, some in handcuffs, it is also of relevance to India and ipso facto to every source country. It is important because through the stories of these hugely successful Indians, one can discern nuggets of experience one might help to develop a zero non-zero sum procession to make migration work for all, and title of article written by Amy Pope, the Director General of UN Organization for Migration. In the latest issue of Foreign Affairs, Ahmed profiles familiar names under four categories. The techies include Kanwal Rekhi, founder of TIE, the US-India Entrepreneurs Club to foster startups, Vinod Khosla, the founder of Sun Microsystems and one of the most successful venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, and company men like Shantanu Narayan, Adobe, and Satya Nadella, Microsoft, and healers or the medicine men that include polymath, doctor of the alternative medicine and mindfulness, and best-selling author Deepak Chopra. Techies include Kanwal Rekhi, founder of TIE, India-US Entrepreneur Clubs to foster startups, Vinod Khosla, the founder of Sun Microsystems, and one of the most successful venture capitalists, and company men like Shantanu Narayan, Adobe, Satya Nadella, Microsoft, and the healers or the medicine men that include the polymath doctor of alternative medicine and mindfulness and best-selling author Deepak Chopra. The younger but comparatively gifted doctors, writers, and researchers Siddharth Mukherjee, Atul Gawande, and Abraham Verghese. The influencers are those that have impacted the public policy, the scholar journalist Fareed Zakaria, the lawyer Nehal Katyal, former governor and President Trump's ambassador Nikki Haley, and Gen Next, a cluster of brilliant millennials who were born in America. All the people profiled by Ahmed are supremely talented. They would have succeeded in any environment, but the accolades they have received did not fall like manna from heaven. Their success is a result of familial support, education, hard work, and an enabling environment. Fareed Zakaria talks about of his mother as his rock of support in whatever he did, which allowed him to explore options at will. Several points point out that education provided them the confidence to circumvent the subtle and not so subtle barriers of caste, class, racial, and religious prejudice that they faced in India and the US. For instance, Kanwal Rekhi narrates the insistence of investors to bring in a white CEO to manage the company he had founded. All confirm that Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour work rule is a sine qua non for genius, and everyone acknowledges the debt of gratitude they owe to the enabling culture in the US that allowed them to realize their genius. None of these individuals came to America through the donkey route, notwithstanding their stories are timely because migration is consistently a front and center subject of political debate. This is because for numerically understandable reasons. Pope estimates that 5% of America's estimate is undocumented and illegal, and that 2.5 million people crossed the Mexican US border in 2023 from 5 lakh in 2022, and Europe received 3 lakh 80,000 illegals in 2023, highest number in one decade. In consequence, the government have tightened border controls and rules related to visas and asylum. Political deportees in the military aircraft is however still a Trump exclusive. The irony is explained by Pope is that current force of anti-immigrant sentiment is happening at the same time that immigration is becoming more essential. She writes that third of the largest economies suffer from labor shortages, and these unfilled jobs cost it estimated $1.3 trillion in lost GDP in 23 alone. She lists several reasons for imbalance between legal migration and economic need: the paucity of channels for legal access, the difficulty of accessing these channels, the spread of disinformation and criminal networks, and the misalignment between labor market demand and visa issuance, the low priority accorded to skills training to meet this demand, and the challenge of landing a job through ethical, safe, and legal pathways. Leaders in both source and destination countries, she recommends, should collaborate to remove these systemic blockers. It is in this effort to remove such blockers that Ahmed's book acquires importance. Indian Americans are the richest ethnic group in America, with a per capita income of $1 lakh compared to $75,000 for other Asians, and 53,000 for the rest. This is based on a poll done by Pew in 2018. Further, the American Association of Physicians has estimated that 10% of US doctors are Indian in origin. These statistics and other data confirm that Indian American across the multiple domains are a valuable asset to the US, and they have enormous intellectual heft, financial resources, global networks, and social influence. Ahmed's book brings attention to the role this community can play in cracking the political conundrum of migration. Her narration suggests that larger swathe of Indian Americans, and not just those profiled, would be willing to leverage their talent and personal experience to help them remove systemic blockers. The responses of those interviewed conveys a subliminal awareness that they confronted anti-immigrant sentiment that has engulfed in the Western world, where, where they might not have got the breaks they did. Their talent would have prized open the door, but they may not have been allowed in. The search for a better future is an integral human impulse. It cannot be stopped. This is not to suggest illegal migration should be condoned, simply that force is a blunt instrument for correcting the present imbalance. Migration can work for all if governments in source and destination countries collaborate with successful immigrants to develop a non-zero sum proposition by looking those for better pastures and those determined to protect their nativist turf. When the bully wins, Trump Zelensky showdown underlines the dangers of live streaming diplomacy. The conventional wisdom is that the only way to stop a bully is to stand up to him. That advice is of little value when your tormentors are not kids but the most powerful man in the world and his understudy. The last 10 minutes of the 50-minute press conference at the White House may well go down in history as the beginning of the end of diplomacy as we know it, in Vladimir Zelensky's self-styled image as the great resistor, and perhaps even the conflict in Ukraine. In the current moment, though, he is also a warning about the dangers of confusing spectacle for transparency and a desire for good television over decency and statesmanship. Things came to a head when Zelensky began questioning VP JD Vance about Russia's invasion of Crimea in 2014 to underline that Putin could not be trusted with a ceasefire. His move backfired. Vance ticked off Zelensky asking, "Do you think it's respectful to come to Oval Office of the United States and attack the administration trying to prevent the destruction of your country?" Trump too jumped in and his overbearing, rude remarks that would make even detractors of Ukrainian president feel some sympathy. You're not winning this. You have a you have a damn good chance of coming out. Okay, because of us, you have to be thankful you don't have the cards. And then the peace resistance from the American president. This is going to be great television, I'll tell you that. Press conferences by heads of state should be a formality. Tough questions are either answered in predetermined diplomatic language or sidestepped. They are, in word, boring. This is both by design and necessity. The compromises, complexities, and hard realities that underline the foreign policy decisions of powers, great and small, are usually insulated from politics because they can be unpopular. Take Trump's refrain that Europe is not paying its share for its security and NATO. This championing of the American taxpayer may play well during polls, but ignores the basic facts. The European powers have not spent as much as on defense was engineered by the US post World War II. It also allows America to remain the sole hard power in the West. Imagine for a moment that the world would, like if the EU had an army commensurate in size with its economy. This then is the real danger of live streaming democracy diplomacy. It makes leaders play to the gallery when they should be acting for the people. Unfortunately, in the age of media saturation, likes and repost, every moment becomes a popularity contest. Democracy appears now to become a pathological version of itself, at least in the land of its origin. Before playing the role of aggressor in Friday's press conference, Vance had earlier in a month made comments on the internal politics of culture wars of the US allies in Europe. Catering to the diplomatic audience on the global stage is worrying. This is especially so in the era of renewed great power competition with China. Beijing is not trying to export communism to the world as the Soviet Union once did, both domestically and globally. It is offering a new of social contract. In the former, it's about material prosperity and consumer choice at the cost of some political freedoms. Globally, it's about making deals agnostic to ideology and domestic politics. The humiliation of Zelensky is a lesson. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine 3 years ago, Ukraine's president has been more of a mascot and less of a politician. He was propped up but as so many others have been before him, the leaders of erstwhile Southern South Vietnam, those fighting for the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, etc., by Western powers in their bid to contain an ideological and strategic foe. Like Trump, Zelensky's road to politics was paved through TV screens. Like TV, Trump, he is a performer, essaying the role of resistance leader, against an authoritarian and expansionist power. In a press conference, it was Zelensky who kept trying to get on a moral high horse he has ridden to meeting after meeting over the last 3 years. What he didn't realize is that his rhetoric, applauded across Western capitals till recently, is a part of an old script. And all for all their words of support, it is unlikely that European countries will go to war without America's or even antagonize the latter too much. Zelensky has been at the center of film script directed and produced by the West. Trump is making a different movie, and this isn't a multi-starrer. Sometimes the bully wins, and the best thing to do is to pretend you like him. Turning the corner, the economy has recovered, but the growth is underwhelming. Another rate cut could be in the offing. In a way, in the third quarter GDP numbers is released at a rather peculiar time in the year. Once it comes in a good 2 months after the quarter has ended and mystery with respect to the future. That is, any cues that could be extrapolated or trends that could be conjectured in the coming quarters is taken away by the first advance estimates, which gives a number for the whole fiscal year and is released in January, a good 50 days ahead of the release of the third quarter numbers. But given the context of the sharp slowdown in the second quarter and global uncertainty post Donald Trump, the third quarter numbers can be looked at in conjunction with the second advance estimates of the GDP to glean a few trends. Note that the quarter growth of 5.4% was shocking and significantly lower than the 8.1% growth recorded in the second quarter of the previous year and marked a 7 quarter low, falling short of both market expectations of 6.5% and RBI's estimate of 7%. So first and foremost question is, has the Indian economy turned the corner? The answer from the set of numbers is yes. There is rebound from the July-September quarter levels as growth has improved to 6.2% from 5.6%, revised upwards from 5.4%. In comparison, growth in the third quarter of 23-24 was 9.5%. Even in GVA terms, there is an improvement from 5.8% in the second quarter to 6.2% in the third quarter, but it must be noted that it remains far below the potential. The second question is, what is happening to consumption? The state of consumption has been one of the most keenly watched given its share in GDP and impact on driving the anticipated acceleration in capacity utilization levels. Consumption improved to 6.9% in the third quarter, up 100 basis points from the previous quarter. In absolute terms, this number went up by 3 lakh crore to 28 lakh crore, with inflation cooling off, improved to rural prospects, and government's measure to spur consumption demand. Consumption growth should continue to do well. The other question marks around the weakness of investments in government spending during the quarter. Gross fixed capital formation or capex growth rate continued to disappoint and fell to 5.7% as against 5.8% in the second quarter, with absolute spending being lower by almost 39,000 crore. In a similar vein, government spending or the government fixed gross fixed capital formation was lower by 29,000 crore. Note that in the previous quarter, the slowdown was primarily driven by decline in consumption and investment. Government spending also acted as a significant drag. The deceleration in consumption growth was largely attributed to weakening urban demand, reflected in high frequency indicators. A tampering of leveraged consumption was also evident with the growth of unsecured retail lending slowing due to RBI's regulatory restrictions on personal loans and credit cards. Moreover, soaring food inflation squeezed household disposable incomes, further dampening consumption. The lingering impact of the slow hiring in sectors such as IT and IT-enabled services over the past few quarters compounded these challenges. Investment growth also witnessed a moderation as government capital expenditure spending tracked lower. Meanwhile, private investments remain subdued and high interest rates continue to weigh on business expansion and industrial activity. From a sectoral perspective, agriculture grew at roaring 5.6% in the third quarter as against already robust 4.1% in the second quarter. Manufacturing grew at 5.6%, 3.3% in the second quarter, and trade, hotels, transport, communications segment also grew at 7.6% versus 6.7% in the second quarter. These sectors are large employers and hence their performance augurs well. An interesting thing is that growth rates in services subsectors of finance, real estate, and professional services, as well as that of public administration and defense, remain unchanged at 7.2 and 8.8% respectively. Talking of annual numbers and the second advanced estimates, real GDP has estimated to grow by 6.5% in 24-25, shortly higher than 6.4% number provided in by the first advanced estimates. It is a tad surprising that GDP has grown by 9.2% in 23-24 as per the second advanced estimates, and this is highest in the previous 12 years except for 2021-22. Further, given the nominal GDP numbers of 23-24 and 24-25 have been revised, fiscal deficit numbers will undergo a revision too. Note: one will have to keep an eye on another set of numbers in May, the provisional GDP estimates, for greater clarity. Other important set of numbers from revised estimates from 23-24 pertain to savings and investment rates. The gross saving for 23-24 is estimated to at 30.3% as against 30.2% in 22-23. On the other hand, the rate of gross capital formation to GDP is 31.4% in 23-24 as against 32.6% in 22-23, is hinting a slightly wider current account deficit than reported. Going forward, improvement in sales volume of the fast moving consumer goods, growth in GST consumptions, collections have spurred strong growth strongly in January, and bounce back in government expenditure augurs well for growth. But given the growth in numbers seem underwhelming compared to the year ago numbers and also compared to the potential growth rate, another rate cut of 25 basis points from the RBI is in play. New Delhi Brussels must seize momentum generated by EU President India's visit and firm trade pacts. In terms of both its nature and timing, European President Ursula von der Leyen's visit to India last week was a pivotal movement for bilateral relations as well as larger dynamics among the world powers. Well before the disruption of the global order was begun by the election of the Donald Trump as US President for the second time, Ursula von der Leyen has decided to put India as top of destinations outside Europe in her second term. Having decided to give relations with Delhi a high priority, von der Leyen arrived in India with 22 of her 27 cabinet colleagues. The return of Trump to White House and crisis of transatlantic relations marked by the US outreach to Russia at the expense of Ukraine and Europe provided an unprecedented geopolitical context for rebooting ties between India and Europe. India was among the first countries to establish diplomatic ties with Brussels headquarters European Economic Community back in 1963, but the relations between two never took off as India drifted close to Soviet Union during the Cold War, and in each turned inwards economically. There was little room for productive engagement between Delhi and Brussels. Early 1990s saw that collapse of Soviet Union, and India's own economic reforms offered a more hopeful setting of partnership between India and a more ambitious European Union that replaced the European Economic Community. Delhi and Brussels unveiled a strategic partnership in 2024 and launched free trade talks in 2007. correction, Delhi and Brussels unveiled a strategic partnership in 2004, free trade talks in 2007, although trade and cooperation expanded. Free trade treaty remained exclusive and talks were broken off in 2013 by the European Union. Strategic partnership remained only in name. India government sought the revival an economic partnership with European Union and renewed talks in 2022. If the pressures on the global economic order and the renewed great power conflict put a premium on the India's EU partnership over the last few years, Trump's disruption in historic US ties to Europe in the last few weeks added a new dimension of urgency. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and von der Leyen were fully cognizant of the imperatives and set out an expansive agenda in areas of economy, security, technology, and connectivity. None of it's more important than the ambition of a concluding free trade agreement within a year. Given the challenges of mounting trade deficits with China and unpredictability of Trump's policies, Delhi and Brussels can no longer deter in upgrading the trade relations. Was it at what is at stake is not merely bilateral trade relationships, but the geopolitical standing of India and Europe in the rapidly changing structure of great power relations. Women spend a disproportionate amount of time in unpaid chores. Um, its repercussions risk being both economic and social. In 2024, women spent 289 minutes a day on unpaid domestic services, 10 minutes less than in 2019. In addition, women also spend 140 minutes a day on caregiving compared to 75 minutes for men, and 41% of women and 21% of men are participating in caregiving activities. This gender division of labor has a cascading effect on women's long term economic mobility and workplace equality. Extensive hours spent on household responsibilities leave women with limited time and energy to pursue paid work. It also limits their ability to acquire additional qualifications. They are more likely to work in low paid, part time, informal jobs, often with fewer benefits or job security. Structural inequality exacerbates wage gaps, with women earning significantly less than men for similar work. In its report, Impact of Caregiving Responsibility of Women's Labor Participation, the ILO argued for investment in the country's care economy. Given the fact that India has 53% of women outside the labor force, although women's participation has grown substantially 41.7% as per the PLFS 23-24, they still account for a much smaller proportion of the total labor force. Men's labor force stands at 78%. In a country spurred by dreams of Viksit Bharat and women-led development, the repercussions of this disparity risk being both economic and social. According to a study by Karmanya Council, CII, and Nicore Associates, women perform over 8 times the amount of unpaid work, valued at 15 to 17% of the GDP notionally. Inclusivity will begin with reimagination of the foundation of household dynamics. Far too often, even with minimum of work done by men around the house are lauded as largesse, while women are put in their place for not being the breadwinner. Dismantling this stereotype will be a good place to begin. So that's all in this one. See you in the next. Uh, the state of consumption has been most keenly watched given the anticipated acceleration in capacity utilization levels. Consumption improved to 6.9% in third quarter, up 100 basis points from the previous quarter. In absolute terms, number went from 3 lakh crore to 28 lakh crore. This number went up by 3 lakh crore to 28 lakh crore consumption, 28 lakh crore. The other question marks around the weakness in investments and governments spending towards quarter GFCF or capex growth rate fell to 5.7%, lowering by almost by 39,000 crore. personal loans. From a sectoral perspective, agriculture grew at 5.6%.